Hello, Buckeye fans. Welcome to a new addition to the Bucknuts family of podcasts. This is one that Bill Kurelic and I have been talking about here for a little while. We're going to call it In the Dean's Office Live. We're going to have some recruiting talk, mostly recruiting talk. We'll talk some team site stuff, but basically this will be a largely Q&A podcast where we take your questions from the live chat, from our message board on the front row, from social media. I imagine a lot of those will be recruiting, but maybe not all. And we'll have Bill or myself answer those. We're going to try it out. We'll experiment with some things. We'll try some different things, and we're going to have some fun with it. So if you like this, let us know. Please like, subscribe to podcasts. If you're watching this on YouTube, hit that thumbs up button, leave comments, 5-star reviews on the podcast. All of that helps us out. But let's get into it. Bill, how are we doing today?
Doing well. And I should give credit where credit's due. The In the Dean's Office Live name for this was created by Patrick Murphy.
So, well, it was a pretty simple one to come up with, if we're being honest.
You're modest. It was a good idea.
Well, yeah, no, it was your idea to do a show. You started talking to me about it, and we just kind of went from there. And like I said, we'll see how episode 1 goes, and we'll take some feedback if people have ideas that they'd like to see or whatnot. But if you are watching this live, and I'll say this throughout, and you have recruiting questions, if you have team questions, whatever it may be, put those in the chat here. We've already got some from our message board. But we're going to go through and we're going to answer some of those. We also have some topics that we want to talk about on our own. Bill, what do you want to start with?
Well, I think the first thing comes to mind for me is that we're about at the time, so to speak. We've got less than 2 weeks now till official visits start. May 30th, Ohio State has official visits. Then right after that, June 5th, is the first one-day camp of the summer for Ohio State. And you, I, and Mark Porter will be the trio. I believe, as far as I know, all three of us will be at all the camps. So
I think that's the plan.
That will be a huge time for Ohio State. And those camps, for anyone out there that doesn't know, June 5th, June 9th, June 10th, June 12th, and June 17th for the one-day camps. And then the 7-on-7 team camps, 2 days of that again this year. They went to 2 days last year, I believe was the first year. But there'll be 2 days again of the team camps, June 11th and June 18th. And I think it was interesting. Anybody out there that is not a VIP member, Ohio State offered this weekend a quarterback, Teddy Gerard, 2027 quarterback from Georgia. Now, offered him a scholarship. He was going to come up June 9th and throw for Ohio State, but Billy Fessler, Ohio State's quarterback coach, saw him throw recently and went ahead and put out the offer this past weekend. So Teddy is not going to need to camp to get that offer. He is going to come up, though, to the 7-on-7 team camp on June 18th. And you have high schools all around Ohio, sometimes outside of Ohio at those camps, and different teams, 7-on-7s. One of the teams that's always is the house team. That's the team that kind of the Ohio State staff, I guess you'd say, puts together. They call it the house team. And Teddy Gerard is going to be the quarterback of that team. So I think it'll be fun seeing him play on the Ohio State house team. And you talk about a good weekend. Teddy Gerard got scholarship offers from Ohio State and Georgia, and I don't think it gets much better than that.
Yeah, no, those two I've heard of before. Before we get too far, because this could bring in some people maybe who don't follow recruiting as closely as others. You're talking about one-day camps versus the 7-on-7s. Do you want to break those down for people? Obviously you and I've been there, but for people that have never experienced that, maybe this is the first time they're hearing it. What should people expect out of these camps? What happens on those days?
Well, one-day camp is basically about a 3-hour camp. They start registering kids and start putting them through some drills. They get things started around 10 a.m. The actual camp time is more like 11 a.m. to 2 p.m. or so each day. And the campers are broken up by position, the quarterbacks and running backs and so on. And they generally work, for the most part, at least the top guys especially, work with the Ohio State coaches. For instance, Carlos Laughlin will be working with the running backs, and Tyler Bowen will be at his first Ohio State camp, the offensive line coach. He'll be working with the offensive linemen, and the coaches have a great chance then to see and evaluate prospects. And as we know, scholarship offers are handed out virtually every camp of the one-day camps. And usually there are somewhere between 5 and maybe 15 at the very most scholarship offers handed out. So it's a great experience for a high school kid to come in, impress the Ohio State staff, and perhaps earn a scholarship offer. Now, the team camps, on the other hand, are 7-on-7 team competitive camps. And they are mostly made up of high schools from the state of Ohio. For instance, Pickerington North, for instance, usually often has a team, 7-on-7 team, and so on. And those kids get to show themselves in a team camp situation or session in front of the Ohio State coaches.
Yeah, and I think it's important to point out, like, sometimes kids come in that know, whether they have an Ohio State offer or not, like, they are there sort of upon request, right?
Right.
Whereas other kids, you pay to go to this camp, and maybe you're looking to impress Ohio State coaches, but there's also coaches from other programs across Ohio, across the Midwest that come in. So while it is an Ohio State camp, kids can not only impress the Buckeye coaches, but there are other, MAC coaches there that can sometimes, see a kid that maybe doesn't fit for Ohio State, but fits for their program. And maybe it's a kid that doesn't fit Ohio State right now, but at least they get to see him in person. And then maybe in a year or so, especially for some of the younger guys, oh, okay, this kid we saw a couple years ago, now he's, grown into a potential Buckeye prospect. So it's a real opportunity for them to be around the coaches. A pretty cool thing that they do. I know other programs do it as well, but certainly gives kids an opportunity to get seen that may or may not be seen elsewhere, depending on kind of where you go to school. You mentioned that house team earlier, like Tavian St. Clair, RJ Day. Those are former quarterbacks who have played on that team that are names that Buckeye fans might be familiar with. So, yeah, a real opportunity. It's fun to be out there, be around the coaches, be around some young players. Definitely shows you the different levels, too, of kind of where everyone is. You see kids that are going into their freshman year of high school and kids that are getting ready for their senior years and things like that. So I always enjoy going out there and watching you and Mark at work. You mentioned visit season. Who are some names that people should be familiar with as this all begins here in the next few weeks?
Well, yeah. The next 4 weeks, I shouldn't say the next 4 weeks, but the 4 weeks starting May 30th, you've got May 30th weekend, you've got June 6th, you've got June 13th and June 20th. Those will be huge weekends in regards to Ohio State and restocking the future, so to speak. There will be plenty of top, Ohio State does a really good job of getting their top targets to the camps. And that will be the case again this year. You look at the first weekend, the June, May 30th to June 1st weekend, it's loaded. You've got Savion Hyder, the top running back in the country, visiting that weekend. You've got Xavier Griffin, the number 1 linebacker in the country, visiting that weekend. Felix Ojo, who is, in my opinion, either the number 1 or the number 2 offensive tackle in the country, making his official visit that weekend. Jake Kruel from Florida, huge Ohio State target at defensive end. And Luke Waffle from New Jersey, another huge Ohio State target. Max Suter, tight end, will visit that first weekend. Caden Dixon White, I should say, is already committed to Ohio State. He visits that weekend, as does linebacker CJ Santa, another Ohio State commitment. Preston Carey from Florida, yet another defensive lineman. So that weekend is going to be packed. It'll be a great way for Ohio State to start off the official visit season.
You mentioned Savion Hyder. We had a question already from Cam St. Preeks on the YouTube channel. Where are the Buckeyes with Savion?
Well, I think anybody, and I've talked about this before, I think anybody that feels like they know where Savion Hyder is going at this point, I think is maybe fooling themselves a little bit or trying to fool somebody a little bit. I just don't think anybody has a great idea. In fact, I think that's why reflective, if you look at the crystal ball right now for Savion Hyder, there are no crystal ball picks for him right now, I don't believe. At least last I checked, there were not. Ohio State, they're getting on campus May 30th. I think anytime the Buckeyes get a kid on campus for an official visit, as I like to put it, I think they have a realistic shot. Georgia, Tennessee, and Michigan are the other contenders for Savion Hyder. And again, I would not go out on a limb and predict anybody as the projected favorite at this point.
While we're on the topic of questions, we'll get another few in here. Billy Tuesday, when is Tyler Atkinson visiting?
That's a $1 million question right now. Tyler Atkinson has told me he is going to he plans to make an official visit to Ohio State. What he hasn't done is he hasn't put out his official visit schedule. Maybe he goes and does the one at a time thing. Not none of our kids will do that. They'll wait until the week of the visit, so to speak. For instance, on Tuesday, they'll put out there, I'm visiting Ohio State this weekend on my official visit. And then they'll wait the next week and say, I'm visiting this school or that school, Georgia, or whatever. So maybe Tyler does that. Although he has told me that it's kind of been his plan that in the not too distant future, he's going to drop his official visit schedule. So if he holds to that, I think anytime now you're going to see Tyler Atkinson detail his official visit schedule. The one thing is that I think you can bank on is Ohio State is going to be on that schedule.
We've had a number of questions both on here. Lisa Sims asking what's going on with D-line recruiting. We had another one from Doug Shepard. So Ohio State in any elite defensive linemen's top 5. We had a couple on social media as well when we put something out. I think there was one on our message board. So I'm going to kind of simplify the question for you, Bill. If you look at Ohio State's recruiting class for 2026, number 3 in the country, you've got 13 commits, no defensive linemen yet. Now, I'm aware that Larry Johnson often closes strong, but I think this time of year, almost every cycle, we have some concerns about defensive line recruiting. Obviously, Larry Johnson and his age is now a thing that gets used against him and whatnot in recruiting. So how would you kind of break down where the Buckeyes are in defensive line recruiting and your confidence that they will get guys that they need in this class?
Well, I think you made a good point that Larry Johnson has more often than not recently got his commits a little bit later rather than at the very beginning. And also, I think people forget Larry Johnson has been able to recruit through the transfer portal pretty well. In fact, he getting Bo Atkinson from North Carolina was absolutely huge. That's a kid that he had a lot of interest and he had a lot of offers and things once he got in the portal, and Ohio State and Larry Johnson won out. So I don't think that should be minimized. Now, Ohio State did lose out, I guess you'd say, on defensive lineman Jameer Perez from Florida, who committed, I should say, from Ohio, from Cleveland Glenville, who committed to Florida over the weekend. That wasn't really expected. Talking to the people at Glenville, they did not necessarily think that he was going to go down to Florida and make a commitment. As of, and I put this in a What I Am Hearing article on Bucknuts a few hours ago, as of earlier today, he had not canceled his other official visits. We'll see if he does or not. He went down there, though, and Florida showed him a lot of love, presented a very, very good package to him, and really, I guess you'd say, convinced him to commit to Florida. Will that change? We'll see. But right now, that's a young man that while he I think has a lot of potential. He is still kind of a young pup, so to speak, and I mean that in a very good way. Um, that I think has his best football ahead of him, but he still has work to do, as almost all recruits do coming into programs. So it'll be interesting to see, one, does he go ahead and take any other official visits? And two, just how hard does Ohio State battle um, to change his thinking on his commitment to Florida?
Yeah, Jameer Perez, according to 247 Sports Rankings, a 3-star prospect, the number 26 player in Ohio, and the number 77 defensive lineman overall. As you said, not a finished product at this point. I think it's also important to, kind of taking it to the team side of things, like not to forget what Ohio State just accomplished just last season on the defensive line. You don't win that national championship without 4 defensive linemen who were then drafted in the NFL draft last month. And, so while there are concerns, I guess, about Larry Johnson and the way he does everything, I remember writing the midpoint of last year, there was a lot of concern about the defensive line not getting enough pressure. The guy still is able to get the job done, I think, when it matters the most. Those were guys that he recruited out of high school, all 4 of them. He has found some depth, or he did find some depth on the line last year. And I think if you look at this year's defensive line, I wrote something recently about it. You've got 4 guys you feel pretty good as starters. You add Logan George already. You talked about the transfer portal, Bill, and then Bo Atkinson, as you mentioned. Yes, you probably need some more depth in the interior, but Ohio State didn't rotate a ton last year on their interior of their defensive line. So, Larry Johnson has found a way to execute, so to speak, with what he's got. And I still think from a recruiting perspective, what he can sell when showing guys the defensive line from just a few months ago in the college football playoff is still appealing. Now, and you can speak on this a little bit as well, Bill, the NIL factor is certainly a part here, right? And Ohio State has said, Ryan Day said it the last time we spoke with him just a couple weeks ago, like, if you are coming to Ohio State and the first thing you want to talk about is NIL, this may not be the place for you. And I think that does, and I'm not saying anyone in particular, but I think especially on a defensive line where if you look in the NFL, those are some of the highest paid guys. If you're Ohio State, are you paying the guys in the transfer portal who have already proven it at the college level, or are you paying the guys coming out of high school? Well, Ohio State's shown more often than not they'd prefer to pay the more experienced guys in the transfer portal, pay their guys that they've kept in the program, maybe more so at certain positions than paying the guys that are coming out of high school.
Yeah, and kind of piggybacking on what you're saying about the defensive line recruiting, somebody asked, and I have to try to find it real quick, but they asked about Jameer Perez, and if he were to stay with Florida, who kind of steps up as the guy to replace him? Jameer Perez is 360 pounds. He is absolutely a 1 technique, a 1 to a 3 at furthest outside. But he is a nose tackle, a defensive tackle, nose tackle. He is not a guy that's going to be a 5 or a 7 for sure. And you look at who Ohio State has coming in for official visits and who they have offered that they're still recruiting. There really isn't particularly a replacement on that list right now. I think the closest you would come is Emmanuel Ruffin from Alabama, who right now I think has Ohio State in his top 3. I had an article on our site about him yesterday, but he's 6'4", 290. If you look at the other defensive linemen that are coming in for visits that have been offered a scholarship, official visits and been offered a scholarship, there aren't any 300-pounders right now on there. Now, that could change, but right now there are not any other 300-pounders on there. So it'd be interesting to see, can they entice a 325-pound nose tackle or defensive tackle into being a Buckeye?
And going back to what I was just saying about the team side of things, they haven't always had that guy. I think when you can find that guy, you absolutely want him, right? The big body that can move and things like that. But it is, those guys don't grow on trees. Now, obviously, you're Ohio State. You should be landing some of the best of the best. But It's becoming a different landscape with NIL and how people are playing it. Let's go on to another question here.
By the way, while you're looking it up, it's great to see some familiar names in looking on and watching and asking questions. Some names that from our Tuesday, Thursday podcasts that have become very familiar to me.
There you go. We have two here that are similar, so I'm going to combine these for you. Larry Ventresco says, "Hello, Bill. Hope you and your family are doing well. Who are the must-gets in the 2027 class from Ohio?" And then Edward Miller said, "Are there any 2026 Ohio kids that may be on the verge of getting an offer this summer?" So basically, the Ohio class of these next two cycles, names people should know, guys you think should be on the radar.
Well, 2027 must-gets. One of them's in the fold. Jameer Brown, the wide receiver from Huber Heights, Wayne. I mean, he is a tremendous prospect with tremendous speed, and to me, he was really a must-get. And shocker, Brian Hartline got him.
Yeah.
And then you always want to get, when you're Ryan Day and when you're now offensive coordinator Brian Hartline, you always want to get a great quarterback for Ryan Day's offense. And in my opinion, they have a great one. That, of course, being Brady Edmonds from California, who is an Ohio State commitment too. So that is a fantastic start. And interestingly enough, they're still recruiting other quarterbacks. I mentioned Teddy Gerard. If they could also get him, I think they would take him as well. He's that good. So those are certainly some guys that I would consider. People don't think a lot in terms of the tight end in Ohio State and must get, but Brock Williams, I really like. He's out of Libertyville, Illinois, and he is really good. And he is a guy that Ohio State likes a lot. Interestingly enough, today they offered a scholarship this morning to Joshua Dobson, who is the number 2 cornerback in the country in the class of 2027. DeVay Williams from California, another great corner that they have offered a scholarship and have a very realistic shot at landing. Maxwell Hiller from Pennsylvania, offensive tackle, great 2027 prospect. I'd put him in there as well. There's some names right there that I think the Ohio State staff would love to get. And you always want to keep the Ohioans in Ohio. Khalil Johnson, an offensive tackle from Cincinnati Taft. I think he has a lot of potential. He's not a Felix Ojo right now, but Johnson's only going into just finishing up his sophomore year. He may be in a Felix Ojo type by the time he gets to his senior season.
I want to grab a couple from the front row or message board, since you had some people post on there. Osbornello asked, one guy you think the Bucks have a legit shot landing that may be a surprise to most.
And before I answer that, I got to mention one other guy that I think would be great for Ohio State to get. Jimmy Kalis. He is 2027 offensive tackle from Pittsburgh Central Catholic. He's got all the offers. He has a Michigan background. That name Kalis certainly is probably familiar to both Ohio State and Michigan fans. And he is definitely considering Ohio State. So if you could get a guy that is a great player and you take him away from what maybe Michigan thinks is going to be a guy headed their way, that's a double win for Ohio State. But now that I've said that, I kind of okay. You were mentioning the possible surprise guy.
Yeah.
I'll go back to that May 30th weekend. Again, people maybe don't associate tight ends with being a huge meter mover when it comes to Ohio State recruiting, but Max Suter, he is a really good tight end out of Illinois. I think most people perhaps think maybe Ole Miss for him, believe it or not. He's been there a number of times. Illinois, that's his home state. And maybe Alabama for Max Suter. But I think Ohio State is right up there that I guess I would not be shocked. It wouldn't be a huge surprise to me if somehow Keenan Bailey pulled that one off and got Max Suter to join Corbin Fordham, who is already committed to Ohio State for the 2026 class as a tight end.
A question from Noah Buckeye from the front row. He said, Bill, I've noticed a wider net as far as Ohio O-line recruiting. Excuse me. I have been a member since 2003 and followed recruiting all the way back to the 90s. I cannot remember OSU being this aggressive in O-line recruiting. What have you noticed? I love Bowen's approach.
I would say 2 words, Tyler Bowen. I mean, he hit the ground running as soon as he got hired by he wasn't even at Ohio State yet, but basically he had not formally, but basically he had been hired and he was hit the ground running when it came to recruiting for the Buckeyes. And he's done a great job. He has offered a lot of guys, and it's not all about offers. You can offer a lot of guys and not get any of them, but that's not going to be the case with Tyler Bowen. He's offered a lot of guys. In fact, I believe he's offered 20 offensive tackles and 14 interior offensive linemen. So he's got 34 offers out to the class of 2026 offensive linemen. And like I said, it's not just offers. He's got 3 of them. Great job of coming in late, but starting quick and getting in-state Maxwell Riley, who was a huge priority, and Sam Greer from Akron-Hoban, another huge. He really needed to get at least one of those guys, if not both, and he got both. He also has Tucker Smith from Arizona, who I think is very underrated. I think he has a chance to be a really good offensive lineman for Ohio State. So he's got a great start there, and he's got a lot of offers out, and a number of those guys have official visits set to Ohio State.
This I thought was an interesting question, and I think we can kind of look at it from both the team and recruiting side. Bucks grad on the front row said, we understood we needed some depth at defensive tackle, so watch during the transfer portal moves with high hopes. But frankly, did you see any defensive tackles in the portal that would have made our 2 deep, whether there was interest or not? Seemed like a thin crop. I think we both kind of looked at that position in the transfer portal, especially coming out of spring practice. What I would say is that while there may have been guys from a pure talent perspective that could have contributed to Ohio State, I go back to some of the thing I said before about the transfer portal and what are the factors the kid's looking for? Is it I need playing time? Is it I need NIL? How do you fit culturally? Because that's something Ryan Day has harped on a lot, and it's something that you saw work for Ohio State's advantage last season, especially coming out of that Michigan game, even the Oregon loss. The culture really held this group together, and credit to Ryan Day and his staff for building a roster that is built in what they feel is the right way, and it worked for them. And so I think, look, you can pull up our database and see the top-ranked defensive tackles, and I think there are some, like I said, that might have fit in terms of an on-field thing, but it is a bigger picture. The on-field, if you were to make this a pie, the on-field is a big slice, but it's not the only slice that they consider when the Buckeyes are looking at guys in the transfer portal. And the one thing I always tell people about the transfer portal is the majority of the guys in the transfer portal, everybody's in there for a reason. Whatever their reason is, there's a reason they got in the transfer portal. But sometimes the reason isn't just I'm looking for more playing time or I see a better opportunity. Maybe I've outperformed my recruiting rankings like we saw with a guy like Logan George or Will Kazmarek. Sometimes there's also a lot of negative stuff on there. And you just have to be careful. Just because a guy's talented doesn't necessarily mean he is the right fit for Ohio State. Bill, I don't know if you want to add any more, if there were names that you thought the Buckeyes might look at that you saw in the transfer portal.
Well, it was mentioned that, were there guys in the portal that could really help Ohio State? Well, to some extent, yes. Maybe not a great player that could come in, although Bo Atkinson, I think, is going to be really good. And by the way, Ohio State is not going to break the pay scale to get people. But I'll tell you what, they did. Getting Bo Atkinson, that was not an insignificant NIL deal. Let me put it that way.
Yeah.
He had some really good offers, some good packages, and Ohio State had to step up with at least a significant package, and they did. But to to get the defensive lineman Ohio State's necessarily looking for, those guys just really aren't in the portal very much. And if they are, the price tag is going to be unbelievable because there are not a lot of them, and they don't jump in the portal that often. And I'll turn that back to you, Pat. Who out there? In my opinion, I don't know that there was anybody out there that necessarily could just have stepped in ahead of the defensive tackles on Ohio State's roster right now.
Well, and I think that's the thing too is, and I'm pulling up the defensive tackle list here from the transfer portal. So a lot of these guys, first of all, I think too, a lot of guys go into the transfer portal with an idea at least of where they're going to go already. So if you're not already in their heads, you may be out of the running already. Because there is back channel communication and technically you're not supposed to do that, but let's be honest, it happens. But just looking through the list, like some of these guys, if you pull up the transfer portals on 247 Sports and go to defensive linemen, like none of the guys listed, I think, are, to your point, Bill, plug and play. That guy is better than Caden McDonald and Edric Houston for sure. Maybe they do turn out to be. We'll see. And look, I said it earlier. I think Larry Johnson continues to do a good job of developing these guys. Now, I know people wanted to add depth, and Ryan Day talked about it. Even Larry Johnson didn't really shy away from it when asked about it early in spring. But how do you sell a guy who's entering the transfer portal, come in here and be a depth guy? I think that's harder to do even at a place like Ohio State, especially if NIL is involved. Where are you paying this guy X amount of money, even though he's probably not going to start? It's similar to the situation at quarterback, right? Ohio State would like to have more than 3 scholarship quarterbacks, but how many guys in the transfer portal want to come in and be a backup to whoever wins the job? Maybe even the third string guy. Maybe you could find a younger guy who you think is a bit more of a project, but is that guy in the portal, and does he have a better opportunity to go play right away somewhere, maybe even at a smaller school than Ohio State? So it's difficult because everybody has, like I said, their criteria for what they're looking for when they get in the portal. And if it's not immediate playing time and you're not going to pay these guys a ton, yes, you're Ohio State. Yes, you have the clout of being the defending national champions and everything comes with wearing the Block O, but that doesn't necessarily sell at the same level that it might have pre-NIL or things like that. So I think Ohio State's starting 2 defensive tackles are as good as anyone, at least potential. We haven't seen a ton of either of those guys yet, but finding that depth guy was always going to be difficult, especially if there wasn't like an Ohio kid who maybe wanted to come home. We've seen that happen before. It's just not easy to sell a kid on, hey, come and be a backup to 2 young guys too. It's not like these are guys that are going to be gone necessarily after next season.
And I will say too, as soon as the portal opened, I had a recruiter, not an Ohio State recruiter, from another school, tell me, if you're going to get a defensive tackle in this spring portal, you are going to pay big.
Sure.
It's going to go, and the numbers are just going to be really high. And to get somebody that you are targeting, most of them are going to start at $800,000 to $1 million plus a year, and that's a pretty hefty sum to pay for somebody that's not necessarily going to be a starter or impact guy.
Yeah, and that's, you look at defensive tackle, again, comparing it to the NFL, it's one of the better paid positions because of, like you said, how few of the guys there are that size that can move the way you want them to. So when you've got them, you usually want to keep them. And Doug Shepard did point out Texas pulled it off in regards to Hiro Kanu, who did leave Ohio State for Texas early this offseason. That's one I've been asked about a lot. I don't have an answer for why Hiro left for Texas, a place where he may not start right away. But I would say that is the exception more than the rule in terms of any guys, but especially at that position. We're going to hit on a couple more here and then get out of here because we don't want this to become a Bucknuts happy hour, for instance.
But we do want our people here to be happy.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Trying to get to as many of them as we can in about a half an hour is our plan for this show. And we've gone a little bit over, but we've got a couple more here. Mecca Hannah, are Arthur Scott, Caden Turner, and Tyrell O'Neill planning to camp for the Buckeyes anytime soon?
I'm putting together a camp list, but I don't do a lot of that because when a kid with the camps says he's going to be at the camp, he doesn't always necessarily make it to the camp. And then a lot of times kids show up that you don't expect. Now, the bigger name kids, you keep track of those guys. But I kind of wait to see who's at the camps when I get there for the most part, save for the big time guys. And the ones that Mika has asked about, I have not been told that those three kids in particular have a Ohio State camp in mind to be at right now. And again, we're still almost 3 weeks or so from the first camp.
Yeah, and I will say Bill does a good job the morning of the camp on the Front Row message board, posting guys that you've gotten confirmation that will be there, you expect to be there. And then one of the first things I do when I get to the camp is come find you and ask, all right, who's here? Who do we need to be on the lookout for? And sometimes your list is different than when you walked in to when the camp actually starts, because new guys come, or we'll have a coach walk over to us and say, hey, keep an eye on this kid or things like that. So it does change a lot. It's tough to tell unless they've made it known that they are planning on doing that. And then we'll end on this one because I think this is an interesting topic. Lisa Sims, do we miss out on so many Ohio kids due to recruiting nationally, or is it NIL? I'll let you answer this, but first I want to say, I don't think they miss out on so many Ohio kids. I think there have been some big name Ohio prospects, especially these last 2 cycles, that have gone out of state. But I do think Ohio State does a good job of the guys that they want from Ohio. And Bill, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but the guys that they really want from Ohio, I would say they have a pretty good hit rate on. But what do you think on this question? And I have some thoughts on it too when you're done.
Yeah, they do have a good hit rate, but a couple things have changed though in the last 5 to 10 years. Number one, NIL. That now you can want a guy, but if another school wants him a lot more and offers a lot more, and you don't want to break that pay scale, then that happens, and that happens for Ohio kids. I mean, Oregon made Trey McNutt offer that he couldn't turn that offer down, and he decided to go to Oregon. So NIL. Number 2, the transfer portal has happened in the last 5 to 10 years as well. That's opened things up. If you go somewhere, it's total free agency every single year, basically. So that's changed things. And the third thing, and I think maybe most importantly up there with NIL, is the conferences. When Ohio State was in just the Big 10, Big 12 even or so, that's one thing. But now you've got the West Coast schools in there. You got Oregon, Washington, UCLA, USC, of course. And that has helped Ohio State recruiting out in the West. But it also has helped the West schools recruiting Ohio. Because if you're an Ohio kid, you can go to USC or Oregon and be playing in the Big Ten. So while that helped Ohio State with their recruiting, the vice versa is true too. It's helped schools to be able to come into Ohio. The SEC is not the old SEC. So those conference realignments really have changed recruiting. Many years ago, someone told me once, who I respect, that you always got to think when you recruit a kid, can his parents come see him play? If they don't have if it's a long, long way away and they don't have the financial means to come see him play, it's going to be a whole lot harder to recruit that kid. Nowadays, with all the money that's out there to pay for kids' visit, all those different things, kids can go across country, and their families, their parents can get to see them play a lot easier. In fact, they may get to see him if it's an Ohio kid. They may get to see him play for USC or Oregon when that team comes to Ohio, for that matter. So some of those changes have really changed the landscape of recruiting.
Yeah, and I think to your point about NIL, if you are a Oregon or a USC and you are interested in an Ohio prospect, especially a good one, and we've seen a couple guys commit, or a guy commit to each of those schools in the last 2 classes from Ohio, I think going into that recruitment, you're going to have to outbid probably Ohio State, but probably also some of the other Big Ten teams in the Midwest that are closer to home, and then maybe some SEC teams that have come in. So I think you go in with a higher probably valuation just because you're trying to pull this kid out of Ohio. And so, where Ohio State starts and where USC or Oregon starts might be a different conversation when they start talking NIL. And that has nothing to do with, like you said, not blowing up the pay scale and things like that. And I think you make a really good point about the opportunity to still be in the Big Ten. And yes, you're going out west, you're going to play in the Pacific Northwest, whatever it may be, but you are still in this conference. And even if you don't play Ohio State, you're going to come and play an Indiana, Purdue, a Michigan, a team like that makes it a lot easier for your family to get to, or friends, family, whatever it may be, to get to at least a couple of your games than maybe it would have when those teams were in a completely different conference, Big 12, Pac-12, Pac-10, whatever it may be. So, again, I still think Ohio State does a really good job at recruiting Ohio. I think if you look at the roster and the number of Ohio kids that contribute, not just are on the roster, but contribute, they tend to do what they need to get done. But yeah, you're going to miss a few. And that was true even before NIL, right? You saw it. And let's be honest, some kids want to just get out of the state and go do, kind of blaze their own path, right? And you've seen that for years. I understand why Ohio State fans get frustrated when Ohio kids don't come play for the Buckeyes. But think about when, if you went to college, the opportunity to kind of go somewhere else and see a different part of the country and things like that. I know that's appealing to a lot of people. So something to keep in mind with those commitments. And I think it's also important to remember, Bill, this as well as anyone, these commitments, especially for 2026, 2027, nothing's set in stone when we're talking about any of these guys, right? That we haven't reached signing day yet. So still a long way to go.
But what we don't have is a long way to go yet on this podcast.
Yep.
So hopefully everyone enjoyed this. And like Pat said, we're going to try to make it a weekly feature. And hopefully you'll be back.
Yep. Thank you, Bill. Thank you all for tuning in. Whether you listen to this live with us on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, if you are on YouTube, please hit that subscribe button. You get not only all of our podcasts, which now includes the In the Dean's Office Live, but all of our video interviews. Bill mentioned we're going to be out at recruiting camp soon, so there'll be even more of that stuff. And then obviously all of our team stuff. If you listen to this on any of your podcast platforms, please give us a 5-star review, leave comments. Those are all important for us. And Bill, thanks again. This was fun.